Hey everybody, we're at the Imp and the Ogre. My name is Paul.
This is Ryan.
And today we are going to talk about Death Frost Doom.
The revised version of it, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so Death Frost Doom version 2.0. This is a Lamentations of the Flame Princess adventure for first level PC, so an old school revival style game. Written by James Edward Raggi IV and Zach S.
I like how one author has his entire name on there, and the other guy's just like, nah, Zach S is good.
It's a funny contrast for sure. So a synopsis of this, basically PCs are investigating a former cultist temple on top of a mountain, and I don't know, as with most Legend of the Flame Princess adventures, weirdness and death ensues.
General impressions?
I like it overall. I like the creepiness that's in it, and at this point, I've read enough of Lamentations of a Flame Princess. I wish I had a shorter name for it. Loptha. I've read enough LF&P adventures to come to expect that certain level of gross, weird uncomfortableness that comes from them. And when used appropriately in the right situations, I think it adds a lot to it. And it is a nice contrast to the more standard fantasy tropes that a lot of adventures have. I mean, this is an old school D&D style game, right? So you get the grittier style, which is, I enjoy it oftentimes, and other people might not. I think the temple is the perfect place to put any particular kind of MacGuffin that you might want to have in your own campaign. Mm-hmm. So it makes it a really nice drop-in style of adventure, right? Because it's literally a location-based dungeon crawl. Put anything you need in there.
Yeah.
You literally just need a reason for the players to go.
Yeah.
Other than that, you sort of wind it up and let it go, right?
Yeah.
And I like that. I like adventures where you can just sort of fit it in where you need to fit it in. Like there's not all this other external plot elements that are tied to it. And because when I'm if I'm prepping something, I like just being able to grab an adventure and just stick it where I need it. And this really suits that. Also, just as sort of a general structural thing that I enjoyed, that given this was the revised edition of the adventure, I did appreciate that they still included the old options, right? Things that they had changed compared to the first version of this were still... the first version stuff was still included, and you could just choose the option that you wanted to use.
Yeah.
And there was a number of cases throughout the adventure where that was the case. And I did appreciate that.
Yeah.
How about you?
It's more Doom than it is Death and Frost, I think. Having run a section of this as a player, you're probably bound to awaken the dead at some point. I don't see how there would be any other option. Having been a player and reading the adventure post, there's really a lot of cool nuance in it that you don't get to experience as a player unless you are, I think, familiar with this adventure module type. Like if you play Lamentations a lot, that you might come to expect that like everything is something and that nothing is ever nothing. So I don't feel like I missed out on stuff, but there's lots of little neat details that if you were very curious that you could run into trouble with or find other neat stuff or clues.
There's a lot of depth to this adventure.
Yeah, there is. Like everything, there's, anything that you choose to investigate kind of has a purpose or there's something there to it, right? Like the whole liquid time aspect of the adventure, we had no idea about, right? And you never would know about that.
Yeah.
But it was neat reading it after and being like, oh, like that's what it would have happened if we did that.
Or, yeah. I think the liquid time stuff, and I probably have it somewhere else in my notes, but it's never really something that the PCs are going to figure out, but it does tie a lot of the dungeon components together, so it makes more conceptual sense.
Yeah.
Is what I appreciated about it. I'm like, yeah, there's no realistic way that the player's ever going to figure this out, but all of these formerly dispirited magical effects make a lot more conceptual sense now if you tie it all towards this I don't know, magical item, artifact, liquid, or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
Like having it all tied together makes it fit. Can make more conceptual sense. And as a type of analytical person, I do appreciate it when all the pieces come to kind of fit together instead of just being a bunch of random cool things.
Yeah.
When there's a logical flow to the concepts, I just like it. So that's one thing I appreciated about the liquid time thing, even though the players they realistically would never even know it was a thing.
Yeah, I think, and like front to back, I think it's a good adventure. There's lots of points where you should leave, but adventurers will want to adventure, I think, and continue on exploring, and you're going to get into trouble for that. So yeah, take it or leave that.
I also like, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but I like how this adventure can set up your entire campaign.
It could, yeah.
Right. If you want to have a campaign all about sort of dealing with legions of undead and defeating armies of the dead, then this is a perfect way to start it off, because your PCs can be the persons that started the undead apocalypse, and now you have to solve your, mistakes.
Yeah, and I don't know if it would be good or not to know that there could, like, to know the purpose of the temple, like, in that there was something sealed there.
Yeah.
And that you don't know what the seal is, because there's lots of stuff in here. There's like triggers for things and ambiance and lots of neat stuff that like any one of these things could be the thing that's holding the seal together.
Yeah.
So that kind of could, you could have like a sense of like, how far is too far?
Yeah.
Like how far do we push without risking, it's kind of like,
I think more foreshadowing.
like Minesweeper-y, like, oh, we opened this door. Did that ruin the game? Nope. Okay. Should we open the next door? Did that ruin the game? Which ones have been safe so far?
I don't know if any of the doors ruins the game per se, but I think
ruins the world.
I think as a DM, you need to understand that if you're going to run this adventure as part of a campaign, then it definitely can. It'll have long-term effects on your game world. I mean, I don't know why we're burying the lead here, but basically, the adventure can end with literally thousands of zombies and ghouls being released into the countryside.
Yeah.
And an undead, basically, Death Knight general escaping out into the world to continue his evilness, if you will. So,
yeah. Now we'll Quentin Tarantino it and come back to the beginning of the adventure.
Freeze frame. You may be asking how I got myself into this situation. Let's go back.
So we'll get there. The hooks of the adventure, per any Lamentations, are really, they just drop you there if you're playing the module. And I think you can just put this mountain dungeon entrance anywhere in your world. It doesn't matter. I think being on a mountain is the way to do it, or you have to modify a bunch of things.
Yeah, it needs to be isolated and it needs to be outside. I don't know that it being on a mountain is necessarily required, but it needs to be kind of in the middle of nowhere. The mountain setting just sort of fits with it. When I ran this, I just stuck a bit of information in there.
Yeah.
Like the party was in search of a location for something, and they figured out that there was the information in the archives of this former cult, so that's what they were.
It's up the hill. I like the initial, the ascent of the mountain, and that you could do one of two ways. You can take the road, and it's creepy and eerie, or not the road, and the writers describe it as an icy and slow-going hell of predators and natural hazards, which is like, I don't know, it's like, why wouldn't you just take the road to the path of the place that you're going to?
Well, I like that as just sort of the right way, quote unquote, to do this type of thing, is that you should definitely have your players incentivized to stay on the roads.
I think it would be funny if one player was like, or a couple guys were like, we're taking the road, and the other guy's like, no way, I'm taking the road, I'm taking the path, and you just like time jump and you're like, you're missing 12 HP and like 40 arrows and you guys are fine. And it's like, well, what happened? It's like, well, you went through the icy, slow going hell of predators and natural hazards and they walked on the path.
But I think it's kind of a neat way of going about it, that you design your game world around the idea that the further you go from civilization, the more dangerous it is. And roads are civilization, right?
And they're built for a reason.
Well, and they're patrolled and maintained, and towns are along roads, so there's all that aspect to it. But if you go 20 miles off of the road in a random direction, you're in orc country or gnoll country or whatever. And I think that's kind of a neat way to do things, and an idea to enforce in your players early, because if you draw a map, roads are never in a straight line. It's never the most efficient way to get there. So if they know that, like, well, it would take us potentially less time if we go, as the crow flies, but it's only faster if we don't run into like 6 random encounters in a bog on the way there, right? Like there's that kind of verisimilitude aspect of it that I kind of like.
Yeah, agree. Well, I guess that leads us to the first major encounter of this adventure, and it's running into the madman Ezekiel.
Zeke Derncaster.
Yeah, and this is the first part of the adventure that kind of sets the tone, in that you stumble upon like very poorly taxidermied skins and animals laying around. And I mean, when I was playing it, I got the sense of danger, but you come to realize that it's just like a crazy old man who's picked up the work of the old priests or whatever and remembering the fallen.
I think it's designed to maybe be taken the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it definitely gives the first encounter with this hermit basically is designed to set your players on edge and maybe make them hostile to effectively a non-hostile individual.
This is the point in the horror movie where you tell the people in the horror movie to turn around. No, this is the weird stuff. This is when you leave the Blair Witch Forest. You don't stay around in camp.
Oh, you may not recall, but the last thing Zeke said to your party was, "You're doomed."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty neat, I think it's a good ambiance encounter. You can like try and take him with you. He doesn't want to go, and he'll escape at his first given moment to run away or whatever. But Zeke was a cool character.
Well, I like that he can give you directions. You can explain what's going on. Like, basically what he's been doing is making gravestones for all the unmarked graves on the cultist grounds. Right. So that's why there's he uses animal hides as like paper, and he carves tombstones, and then he like paints on things in blood because that's all he has. So that's why it's super creepy, is there's all this blood and animal viscera everywhere. But it's just because he doesn't have paper and ink. Interestingly
enough about this encounter, which I didn't pick up on in the adventure, and because you don't really appreciate it unless you're paying attention to detail. But when you get to the graveyard later on, if you investigate properly, you can see that the gravestone markers, which are now in stone, are those of the same make that Ezekiel was making of the fur, right?
Yeah.
Because the area turns things to stone eventually, and it's like, that's a neat environmental effect, right? Like, it makes you also think like, oh, weird, something else is going on.
Well, there's other interesting things too. Like, you don't know if you picked up on it, but in Ezekiel's camp, you can see some of the names written down on stuff. And then when you actually go to the temple and there's the book of the dead, you can see that the names match and all that type of stuff. So there's a lot of that sort of internal logic, which is really, really good. Zeke will try to stop the players from going to the temple if he knows they're going there. So as long as you don't tell him that we're going to go check out the cultist abode, he's like, all right, well, go about your day. Yeah, he'll offer you some tea and some, snacks if you hang out with him. But, he's a harmless eccentric for the most part, but like, he really doesn't want people to go up there. So he'll try to like physically prevent you from going, which again might instigate conflict.
Yeah.
But to get out of it, literally all you have to say is like, okay, Zeke, we'll listen to you. And he's like, good. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Other thing I like about Zeke is that, he'll offer to watch any of your animals.
Yeah.
But if you're not back in 3 days, he eats them.
Yeah.
We're
just assuming you're dead.
He assumes you're dead.
Yeah.
So he's just like, well, I'm not, waste not, want not, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty funny because
it's realistic, right?
Well, it's realistic, yeah. And when I ran this, the adventuring party did leave their donkey behind, I believe, Penelope. So
right, yeah.
I felt bad because the PC actually had named their donkey and
yeah.
there's a better than half chance that it was going to get eaten by Zeke.
Next notable place I have is the graveyard.
Yeah. So there's no encounters by design to get there. I think the important thing is to play up that sort of things get eerier. Mm-hmm. The forest should go quiet and there's no bird sounds anymore or anything like that. The stereotypical kind of
and everything's
foreboding.
Stone now.
All the
trees are stone. Graveyards are stone. Everything's stone.
Yeah.
So in the graveyard, I mean, there's nothing here to fight you, but if you had choose to sleep for some reason in the graveyard,
sleeping anywhere whatsoever
is bad in
the
this
adventure is awful.
Yeah. So if you sleep in the graveyard, you are automatically visited by the spirits who want to communicate their agony to you. 25% chance that you'll not have a restful sleep, so it won't matter, and now you'll be suffering -1 to rolls until you get a full night's sleep, and you'll continue to have nightmares for weeks. Thought it was neat if you cast Speak with Dead. If it's unsuccessful, you take damage and have a 25% chance to gain insanity and a 50% chance to lose Constitution or Wisdom. Yeah. I don't know how you would translate those numbers into D&D maybe, but it seems kind of punishing. But perhaps that's what you're running if you're choosing to run these adventures. So maybe you just leave those percentages as is. Or
just exhaustion levels and things like that is what you would do. Stacking debuffs. It's an interesting mechanic to prevent dawdling.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't do the 15-minute adventuring day in here because you realistically can't rest. And this is as minor as the penalties for resting gets.
Yeah.
It's worse when you're inside the cabin, which is in the graveyard, and it gets even worse as you move into the temple itself. So it's designed again to just not allow your players to recuperate. It's not supposed to be a leisurely exploration. This is a surgical strike.
Yeah.
Get in, get out. The only thing that I didn't like so much about that is that it's not foreshadowed at all in any way. So there's no way for the players to realize the consequences of sleeping until they try to take a long rest or what have you. And based off of the pacing of the adventure, that's not going to happen in the graveyard.
Yeah.
Right. Realistically, the first time they rest is when they're deep in the bowels of the dungeon and they just could all go crazy right away.
Yeah.
And that seems a little punishing to me.
Yeah.
So I think you need to maybe telegraph the consequences of that a little bit more. I mean, there's some minor foreshadowing, I guess you could say, but in general, I could see a player resting and then you're like, make a save. And they're like, why? Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, in our game, you made us all have individual nightmares about our death and stuff like that. I think the first time we slept, which I thought was fun. I liked reading
that was from something else.
Was it?
I think it was from playing on the piano.
Oh, right. Okay.
You guys didn't sleep. You were setting up to sleep, and then the game kind of fell apart.
Right.
But,
so, yeah, another funny thing, which is in all Lamentations games, if you drink out of the well in the graveyard, if you drink it and then sleep in the graveyard, your hair turns white and you lose a toe. There's always these little funny things in Lamentations game that you're just like, what, really, a toe? That doesn't make any sense. But moving on from that, is the cabin is next, and the cabin is full of all sorts of evil things. I
wanted to mention about the hanging tree first.
Oh yeah.
So there's a hanging tree in the graveyard. It's made of stone like everything else, but it's evil and it hates everything. And the reason why I bring this up is because I thought it was really weird to include the information at all, because the players are probably not going to interact with the tree whatsoever, right? Unless you're trying to commune with the tree you'll never find out that it's like it hates you, right? If you try to cut the tree, it bleeds blood, so that would tip people off that maybe there's something special about this tree. But it doesn't really serve any purpose. It's kind of there, but it has this like a paragraph of information about this tree in the adventure, and that got me thinking about how much in this adventure and Lamentation adventures in general is really just there for the DM.
Just to read, yeah.
Just to read. Like, that's one thing I will say about these adventures, for better or worse. They have a lot of information that's more just sort of narrative, interesting things for the DM, which makes them fun to read, but it's not necessarily useful information.
There's so much stuff in here that's just obviously for the DM. Like the eyes of the stag trophy on the wall are filled with, and if you do it the bed, and it's like what player is going to take the eyes out of the stag and do something with it, right? Like, or even notice that kind of stuff. Those are just sort of, I would never think to be like, what do the eyes in the trophy look like?
Oh yeah, a lot of really clever, interesting things that are never going to come to play because the players most likely will not be interacting with them, which I think is really interesting. What gets a ton of time devoted to and what doesn't. Like, this is the temple of the Duvenku. What did the Duvenku? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's literally no information whatsoever about what the cultists are, what they do.
But maybe that's sort of like the point of Lamentations, is that like they're cultists. They did cult things. Like, everyone knows what a cult is. You don't need to describe that. But like, for the off chance that you decide to play with the cuckoo clock, this could happen. Like, you could rewind time and go forward in time, and all of a sudden you're older and they're younger, right? Like, we didn't even get to do that in the game. We didn't even think to look at a clock, right?
Why would you play with the hands on a clock, though, right? Like, it's the
well,
kind
exactly,
of thing.
But like, what if someone was like in the game, they're like, it's not 12:30. I'm just going to change that to the correct time, or like for some odd reason. But now you've got that detail in there.
Well, just for speaking for myself, why I like when people put in information about, say, like the Duvenku or something like that, is information about organizations or cults and things like that. I can steal easily for my own campaign.
Right.
A time traveling cuckoo clock, I don't know how much I'm going to use that. It's a neat idea. Don't get me wrong. Like, I could definitely see making an adventure that focuses around that really cool kind of magic item. But for me, whenever I'm reading published adventures, I'm always looking for sort of idea fodder. Like, I just want to stimulate my own creative juices. So whenever you put in some information about...
But maybe like the idea is just the idea of it, right? You've got this old cult that was sealed away for being evil, and now they're undead and they want to come back to life. Fill in cult details on your own.
Put in what you want.
Steal the cult from the other adventure. Now they're the Duvenku. Right? So the mud sorcerers are the Duvenku. Whoever. Right?
I hear what you're saying. It's just, I find it funny that there's all of this information about the consequences of playing different real-life songs on the piano without saying anything about who these cultists were. Right? Like, I don't need a giant novel about the cultists, but like 2 sentences wouldn't have been
I think a lot of these adventures were probably written because, I mean, this was a small game style, I guess, when it was starting out, right? So maybe these were written for his players that he was playing with, and he knew those were the songs that they thought they might try and play on the piano.
I think it's definitely, it was a game that was designed for a specific group of people. It's expanded beyond that for sure, right? It's very narrow focus, we'll say. But again, it's just one of those things that, like, of all the things to talk about or not talk about, I disagree with where the focus was sometimes.
I could just see, well, what's the cult about? It's a cult. What do you need? What does it matter? It's a cult. They did cult things. They're bad. Start exploring.
I know, but like, when you're running it, like, there's lots of questions that I could see players asking and trying to figure out.
I don't disagree with you on your point. I'm just saying, I could see the guy writing these adventures and his players being like, but what's his name? But Zach, what's the cult all about? And he's like, what does it matter? There's cool things all over the place. Start exploring.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can understand the logic behind it, but from my side of the table, I'm like, it would make my life a little bit easier because there's sentient undead in here.
Yeah.
Like, there's people, quote unquote, that you can interact with and ask questions of, and
You have no answers.
I have no answers provided with me. I can come up with them. Right?
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, I can come up with them. But when I buy a published adventure, the whole point is I want to come up with the least amount of stuff as possible.
True.
So that's my ongoing complaint oftentimes.
I do enjoy the humor of the authors of this adventure. In the cabin, there's a door that doesn't have hinges, I guess, and it can fall and crush one of your players.
That was pretty
And
funny.
And he was kind of like, but why, James and Zach? Why would you kill your players? And they're like, basically, if you have non-door checking before door to lair ancient evil opening schmucks you got for players, they deserve it. Yeah. I found that really humorous and just laughed when I read it.
Well, what I found humorous about it is that when I ran it for the group, you guys went in the back door. So you didn't even check the front door. You didn't check the back door either, but it doesn't fall and crush anybody.
Hey.
You dodged a bullet there, literally, but
even the blind mouse finds the cheese once in a while, right?
Yeah. So the cabin is sort of the topper on the temple. It's nothing. It's not the evil part. It's just the creepy part, and there's lots of creepy things in there. I loved the painting. That it's this, creepy blood altar and giant skull, and the PCs are painted into the painting.
Yeah.
But the painting shows so when a person looks at a painting, whoever is in the cabin, when you look at the painting, is painted into the painting. Right? That's how it works. So if there's 4 PCs and 2 PCs go in first, and they look at the painting, they're going to see 2 PCs in it. If the other 2 PCs come into the room and look at it, there's now 4 PCs in it. But the first 2 guys still only see 2 PCs in it. So everybody who looks at the painting sees different people in the painting based off of who was in the cabin when you look at the painting for the first time, which is what I got a kick out of, because the painting's worth a ton of money. So if you take the painting, take it back to civilization, the person who looks at it, there's not going to be anybody painted in it because there's nobody in the cabin when they look at it. It's just this weird magic item, and it drove the party nuts because not everybody was in the cabin when they looked at the painting for the first time. And then the rest of the party came in, and then there's all this confusion about... No, what do you mean I'm in it? No, you're in it. No, I'm not in it. Like, and they were coming back to me like, did you make a mistake explaining stuff? And I'm like, nope, I explained it correctly. Oh, and eventually people are just like, okay, let's carry on then. Yeah. Let's just ignore the fact that we can't agree on what's in the painting.
Yeah. So I talked about the eyes of the trophy stag a little bit before, but now I'm realizing why I liked it in the thing. So you can find a dead mountaineer outside in the graveyard who's like in his pajamas. So the eyes of the trophy stag are the soul of Norquist, the mountaineer. Yeah. So if you break them, it can reanimate his body and they can attack you. Just like, that's a neat thing that you would probably never, ever, ever find. And why is his soul in the eyes of the stag?
Yeah, it's liquid time, man. Yeah. That is one thing that I thought was kind of interesting about the way that this was structured. So, Lemon the Flame Princess, most of the stuff is set in sort of an alternative European past, if you will. So it's basically supposed to be grounded in the real world to a certain extent. So standard D&D rules don't always apply. But what I thought was interesting about this adventure is how they made the undead work. And it's that basically, as we'll see, all their souls are trapped in little globes of liquid time, like in the stag eyes. So if they get released, all the undead animate, but they animate with like the souls of the people that died in them. So there's sort of this baseline memory thing that's in there. They're not completely sentient undead, but I think it mentions somewhere that they're going to try to like find their way home and go back to like what they used to do type of thing, which I thought was kind of an interesting take on undead, that they're not just mindless automatons, that there's a certain basal sentience in there, even if it'd be
funny, like in a future narrative, if you continue on this pathline, that you're walking through a town where there's just like mindless undead plowing fields, right? Because they were farmers before. Yes. So now they're trying to farm again. And, maybe families are continuing to live with like a zombie plowing their field because they're like, well, it's just what he does. I don't know.
So I think that was just kind of a cool idea. Speaking of the deer head and stuff that's probably never going to come up, what I did appreciate is that if everything goes to pot and all the undead on the mountain reanimate, the deer head reanimates too.
Yeah.
And like cackles maniacally and laughs and it's totally just ripped out of the Evil Dead movie. But I like that movie and the scene appeals to me, so it would have been a hilarious thing to actually come to fruition.
Yeah. Also, the cuckoo clock that we talked about before, I thought it was kind of neat. If you move the 4 hands forward, your character will disappear because you've traveled into the future, and if you rewind it, everything else freezes until time catches up to the proper time.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of a neat way of doing it, is the person who
just vanishes
and reappears in the room
at the moment that you set the time to.
Yeah, no, I thought that was clever. I also like the room that has 3 chairs in it, and the 3 chairs are always pointing at the person who walked into the room. So there's multiple entrances. So if you go in like one door, they're all pointing towards you. And if you go around the house and go in the other door, they're pointing at you again.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with anything. It's just creepy. Yeah. And it's designed to be creepy. I thought that was a cute touch.
Yeah, I agree.
And there's other weirdness in here that I don't want to...
There's lots. There's like, I mean, if you go through all the details, we'll be here for hours, right?
Yeah, so we're going to sort of plow on here a little bit. But
so once you go through the cabin, as soon as you kind of open the entranceway to the shrine, you're on a timer. The thawing of the undead begins, right?
It's not a hard timer. I mean, so in the cabin, there's a trap door that takes you into the temple proper. When you go into the temple proper, that's when there is a bit of a timer that kicks in. But the timer only comes into play if you kill the sacred parasite.
Ah, okay.
Right. So basically, the longer you spend in there, it only matters if you kill that thing, which you don't ever have to.
Yeah.
Right. There's a big amoeba monstery thing that if you kill, it releases all these souls and it reanimates all the corpses. But that's getting a bit ahead of us here. So I like the hallway of carved faces that if you touch them, they scream at you. Mm-hmm. Well, again, just sort of a cool horror thing.
I mean, I guess before we start talking about things, this dungeon's just full of multitudes of like neat things. And we're probably just going to talk about the ones that we enjoyed out of it, because it is a big dungeon crawly type thing.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a lot of it's going to be a bit of a flying survey.
So right? I think we've both pulled out things we probably liked of the adventure.
Yeah, I think it'll be more of the style that we've done in the past with things like the Tome of Horrors or Temple of Elemental Evil. Just focusing on the highlights. It's too involved to cover everything.
Yeah. So sorry, go ahead. The face with walls.
I like that they screams when they did. I like the fact that there's the magic item skeleton hands that if they magically attach to the severed limbs. So if you cut off the hand of a corpse and put one of these skeleton hands on, it'll start writing like it was the Speak with Dead spell, but it's by written. So you can ask the corpse questions and the hand will write stuff. And I'm like, that is a cool idea for a magic item. So that was just like thumbs up from me. The skull timer, which we'll talk about. So if you go into the chapel, there's these ice skulls hanging from the ceiling. They start to melt as soon as the chapel is open. And there's all kinds of narrative reasons for it, which I don't care enough to spend all the time explaining. But basically, this is one of those situations where you're supposed to keep track of real-time passage, because every 10 minutes, one of the skulls falls, and that removes time from when the undead animate. Like, I didn't really understand the purpose of it, because realistically at the table it's not going to come into play at all.
Yeah, like the only thing I think it could come into play is if there was undead in the room and the skull fell when you were in the room and it animated the dead. There's no other way for you to know that there's purpose to them falling, right? Like, because I think when we ran it, it's like there's frozen skulls, and we came back to the room and you're like, some of the skulls are on the ground. And it's like, okay, well, whatever.
Exactly. You have no way of knowing the consequences of it.
Yeah, so unless there was undead in the room that animated when you were in the room when a skull fell to indicate that, like, oh, we're on a timer, maybe.
Yes.
Right? Like,
I think it would be, you could tweak it a little bit and make it like a chandelier of skulls of different sizes or something like that. Like a big one in the middle and then some small ones around. And if you had more obvious crypts, that one fell and now there's some skeletons animated, and then you come back again and another one's fallen and now there's to really show that it's ramping up type of thing, like more monsters or stronger monsters or something.
Yeah, because I don't think it's entirely fair to put your players on a timer if they don't know they're on a timer.
Well, I think it's clear that I think it's pretty obvious that time, like there's something going to happen, but there's really little evidence to show the consequences of it, which it wouldn't actually be that hard to tweak with some of the stuff in the adventure. Like there's a ton of murals that show a lot of information, and I think you could probably even just make up a mural idea that with some good rolls you could get more insight into what the different things do. Like the idea that there's inert undead that might reanimate under certain circumstances. But I think one of the running themes in Lamentation Adventures is that the adventures are supposed to be dangerous, that like going into a dungeon has an implied chance of death. Right, that's the risk that you take.
They certainly have this in these adventures for sure.
So I think it's supposed to not be fair, I guess is the point.
One of the things that I liked was in the priest crypts. I mean, if you're searching for stuff, if you roll 3 1s, doesn't really matter. You can find a scroll of an ancient anti-joke, which is only funny if read to undead. And if the living hear it, so if undead hear it, they're stunned and they laugh for a round. But if living hear it, they have to save versus magic or flee for 5 rounds, and they're just terrified by the jokes. They describe it as terrified by the jokes penetrating insight into the nature of existence. Just like, I don't know, something so meaningless, but like these adventures are full of these kind of things that are just awesome. You know?
Oh, there's all kinds of weird stuff in this. There's the high priest's chamber. In a secret compartment, you can find a bunch of globes of more liquid time, but each one contains a pocket universe that has each running of Deathfrost Doom. So in each of these globes is another parallel group of adventurers running Deathfrost Doom, and it's implied that like if anyone listening to this has run the adventure before, well, your PCs are in one of these globes, and my PCs are one of the globes in yours. Like this, it was a little too meta for me, but I thought it was kind of...
I'm in your globes and you're in my globes. Whose globe are we in?
Am
I one of the globes? Are we watching our own globe?
No, it was a bit weird, but I don't know what would happen if PCs would have discovered, because my PCs never discovered it because it was behind a locked door and nobody had lock picking and nobody wanted to knock down the door. So that was defeated by a door. What do I like? The door of vomiting statues. If you open it without making an offering to the fountain first, you're cursed to de-age by 1 year per day until you're 5 years old, and then to age again at 1 year per day until it's 90, and then de-age back again to age 5. The curses in here are pretty great.
Yeah, it's just like, that's good.
There's a bunch of other ones too. I can't remember.
The Eye of Many Eyes was another shrine. If you drink the water in it, 1 million eyes start to sprout where your eyes were, causing your head to explode after a certain amount of time. It's just like...
Yeah, I do like that they often give the authors give the justification, like, if you players are drinking water in a death cult's temple, then they have what's coming to them.
I know, right? And I would completely agree. If you're in the middle of a death cult water fountain, don't drink it. And... you deserve it.
You deserve it. I liked that there's a book you can find, and it's a book for making unthings. That the unthings are basically some sort of type of flesh golem, but and there's instructions on you need this many cadavers and blah 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 blah. But when you make the unthing, its main drive is to kill its creator.
Yeah.
Right. So it gives you this super powerful item, if you will. You can make these golems, but if you actually do make it, it's just going to try to kill the creator. And I like that. I think it's the right type of mean, because if your players are collecting cadavers to make a undead monstrosity, they again kind of have what's coming to them. But it's not super punishing, because if you're in a party and you have other people around, you should be able to defeat it. But it's kind of a Frankenstein's monster kind of idea.
Like, it's kind of a shame that our party didn't get farther into this adventure because we had a warlock who chose the feat that you could comprehend all languages.
Yes.
So this was really an interesting place for him, and there's like really cool things in here, such as the Book of a Million Violations, which if you survive reading it, you have to save or be feeble-minded, and he would have been able to read it because he understood Duvin Ku.
It lists. Yeah, I love it. This book of whatever it was called there lists all of the Duvin Ku's crimes against the universe or something like that.
So if you can survive reading it and survive being feeble-minded, you all of a sudden have 25 wisdom, so you become all-knowing effectively. Yeah. You're immune to fear and charm and mental attacks forever. But 2d4 weeks after finishing it, 2d6 demons are summoned to your location and try and kill you. So it's like... This would have been, I think, brilliant to play out in game, and all of a sudden Basil is dead, and we don't know why, and he's been slaughtered. But, and if you fail your save, you get turned into Sacred Parasite, and become a goo. But it just, there couldn't have been like a more perfect situation for all the horrors of this place to have been brought to life. Oh no, character.
This adventure was chosen partly based off of who was in the campaign and all that type of stuff. Like it was tailored for the PCs. I mean, basically, though, when I ran this, I knew it was super deadly. So the actual MacGuffin is in a library side chamber that's before all the craziness,
which we found immediately.
Yeah. Found, and the DM was nice and said, "You found what you need. You can go whenever you want." I'll point out that at this point, our monk had almost died, was one saving throw away from it. We were playing a 5th edition version of this. And our cleric was cursed from collecting cursed items. Like, it just...
Hey, I remember explicitly saying, like, guys, we've got a lot. We can go. And everyone was like, I think there's more to be found. Like, we got greedy. So,
yes.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. One thing I did like about this is that in several places throughout this part of the temple that there's things that are written in the language of the Duvin Ku.
Mm-hmm.
And
everywhere.
Most people can't, it's a forgotten language, basically. People can't read it. There's a magic item that you can find that allows players to read it. You can cast comprehend languages, and you can read it too. But there's certain things that if you read what it says and speak it aloud, it induces compulsions.
Yes.
And I thought it was kind of a neat thing. My players were a little confused as to what was going on and didn't really know how to respond properly. It resulted in a suicidal halfling. Trying to sacrifice themselves, and it wasn't even like the most hardcore one. One of the ones the person tries to like stab themselves. Right, there's some pretty crazy compulsions, but I thought it was kind of an interesting thing to illustrate that sometimes words have power, and you shouldn't just be reading the instructions off of cult equipment. You know?
I mean, you speak to cast spells, so you could have just cast a spell. Yeah, that was an interesting part of the campaign. Another thing that I really like, there's like a massive undead in here that's too big to move, and it'll send fetuses and maggots at you and try and kill you and like try and convince you to come closer to it and things like that.
Yeah, so there's some secret... basically, you go through the temple, you find this thing called the Sacred Parasite, which you kind of can figure out some of the information regarding it, but basically this creature is what keeps all the dead sleeping. So on the way to here, you can find all the corpses. I'm going to get to your intelligent undead in a second here, but I'm just sort of setting the stage. But there's all these tombs that you can find. They're just full of dead bodies, which my players never even went and checked out those doors. So they didn't see all the thousands of corpses. But basically, you kill the Sacred Parasite, it reanimates the dead. And this is where the timer comes into play. The longer you've been in here, the fewer the skulls there are, the faster the undead reanimate.
Mm-hmm.
In the room where the Sacred Parasite was is the main chapel, maybe? Main shrine. This is where that Book of Violations is. And secret chambers that lead you to the tombs of the greater repugnances. And these are all high-ranking members of the Duvin Ku that are now all intelligent undead. Which is where your rotting, disgusting...
Fat undead
person lives.
Yeah.
And there's some cool, like, unique undead in here. There was the one that the party actually did...
The interrogator.
...find out by crawling through the vents. A greased halfling in the vents found this one. But this monster attacks by asking questions. And if you lie or say, I don't know, you take damage as bone needles burst out of your flesh, which I thought was pretty fun.
Yeah, I only wrote about the fat undead. She was great. But the thing I liked about the, I don't know, undead generals or whatever you want to call them, was that they had motivations.
Greater repugnances.
Yeah, the greater repugnances. But they had motivations, and some of them didn't like the other ones. So they could ask for you to do things, and you could maybe gain favor with some of these intelligent undead by maybe just killing someone else or whatever it is.
Well, I like there's also the one that was non-hostile. I can't remember the name of it, but it made any oaths that you were said before it.
The Crypt of the Testifier, I do have room.
It made them binding.
Yeah.
So if you made an oath in this creature's presence, you knew that it was like basically you were betting your soul. And if you break your oath, like a portal to hell opens up and a bunch of demons come out and like pull you down into it. So it's super, super interesting thematically, and it plays a role because one of the greater repugnances is, I wrote the name down because it's badass. It's Praetor Pontifex Cyrus Carnithrax Maximus, the general of the Duvan Coup. And in the older version, I think it's a vampire. In the newer version, maybe a Death Knight. I'm not sure the exact stats are of it because you're not supposed to fight him. Like, he's uber.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about him is he's bound to the crypts, so he can't leave unless a living person invites them to leave. So what I think the way the adventure is designed is that you're supposed to animate the undead, now be basically trapped by thousands of undead, and basically be forced into making a deal with his undead general. Because the undead general can command the undead.
Yeah.
So I think the way it's supposed to play out is you talk to this general guy, you make a deal with him, he makes you pledge an oath to get him out of the temple and take him to a major urban population.
Yep.
And then he'll help you escape. So that's how you're supposed to get out. I mean, there's other ways you can get out, but that's kind of the main idea. And I just love that because at the end of this adventure, the PCs have freed a high-level undead general who will now resume his war against the living and animated several thousand lesser undead, which will now like spill out into the countryside and need to be dealt with. And you now have the theme of your future adventures.
Yeah.
And, had the campaign not kind of petered out in the middle of this adventure, the Carnifex or whatever, Carnithrax Maximus, would have been a recurring villain to be dealt with in the future. Like, as the PCs got stronger, you would have had to deal with this, your past misdeeds, if you will. And I just think it's really cool that the adventure leads into all this other stuff if you make it out.
Yeah, he was cool. There's one other guy I've written down that I thought was awesome before we can do our final thoughts about this adventure. But he was Maximus. He was a spell-casting undead, and his spells are etched into his bones. And that spellcasters can learn his spells by replacing the bones in their own body with those in his body. I thought that was like you could do surgery on yourself and learn more spells from that.
That's super neat.
More Lamentations awesomeness.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think by having sort of a rules light system, or at least a magic rules light system, you can do a lot of cool things in Lamentations that you can't in maybe the more rule dense styles of games.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you run something like this where you've tweaked it to 5e, you tend to have a lot of players going like, that's not how it works. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Which can be a bit irritating.
I thought this was a great adventure. I think that if you wanted to run a death style adventure, this is it. I think it outshines any of the D&D death dungeons we've done. There's a lot of motivation in it. The environment's great. There's story. There's reasons for things to be there. There's things to explore aside from just like you're going here to die. And there's also places you can leave.
You can leave at almost any point before you trigger sort of the
world-ending event.
World-ending stuff. Exactly. Like, that's not forced upon you. It's deadly, but nothing feels particularly unfair.
Yeah.
right? Except for maybe the sleeping thing. But that's not a kill you. It's might drive you crazy type of thing. But anything that can outright kill you is something a normal, rational person should not be doing in a death cult.
Yeah, there wasn't
temple.
anything in there that happens to you and you go, yeah, I guess I deserve that. You know, like all of them are those moments. It's like, yo, you shouldn't have drank the water.
Well, there's no
Shouldn't have
moments
done
where you
that.
walk through a door and get teleported naked back to the start of the dungeon.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Honestly, that's just going to be my gold standard for unfair. Is
Yeah, I feel like those dungeons versus the lamentation dungeons, like this one, it's like you're punished for doing things you probably should know you shouldn't be doing, not for just existing, right? And that seems to be the difference.
Yeah. Well, it's also the idea that dungeons are supposed to be dangerous. The rewards in here are ridiculous. Like you can find tons of highly valuable items. Like just general stuff, gems and things like that. So the rewards are there, but it really plays up the idea that anybody going into an old death cult dungeon knows that they're taking their life into their hands, but the rewards are worth it. Right? So it's a cool kind of style of play that contrasts quite nicely with your standard D&D.
Mm-hmm. Agree. So I guess we don't have to ask you the question if you would run it because you have.
I have run it. I ran it by choice. I like it. I think it was mostly a success. I definitely think I ran into some issues with players that are expect a more PC friendly adventuring environment than the OSR style games, but I liked it. I'd run it again.
Yeah, it was great. I think I would run it too. Anything else?
No, I think this has gone on long enough.
All right, guys, as usual, thanks for listening. You can email us at the impandogre@gmail.com or get us at the Twitters at the Imp and Ogre. Next week, we will be talking about Blood in the Chocolate, another Lamentations adventure. So thanks.
Bye.